Ready? Okay, just a quick question. Can I get some water, please? All right. Okay, begin. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilman wa 'amalan ya arhamar rahimin. So we are continuing our discussion, which are part of the introduction of sorts to the Nawawi 40. So we know the Imam Nawawi's Arba'een, or what is known as the 40 Hadith collection. It's a work on Hadith, and we began our discussion by looking at what is a Hadith. So we've talked about the Hadith, and we also looked at its synonyms. We looked at the Sunnah, we looked at Khabar. These are some of the words that are associated with it. And then we moved on to look at writing, at exactly what time were Hadiths preserved in writing. So we looked at preservation of Hadith. I think this is what the broad topic is called, preservation of Hadith. We saw that preservation was primarily based on memory. People would see something the Prophet ﷺ did, and that they would follow him, they would copy it. When the Prophet ﷺ said, we need to do this, then the companions did it without saying, hang on a second, I need to write it down and commit it to writing. And then we looked at literacy amongst the Arabs. So we looked at the pre-Islamic period, and we saw that they did know how to write, although it's questionable. Well, it's certainly the case that not everyone wrote in, let's say, pre-Islamic Hijaz, but that there were individuals who knew how to write in the pre-Islamic period. Thereafter, we progressed at let's say, the seismic shift that Islam made to literacy amongst the Arabs. Once Islam comes, then pretty much everyone is literate, is learning to read and write. And that literacy then no longer becomes the privilege of the rich and, if you want, the powerful. Rather, it's the preserve of all Muslims. So everyone learns how to read and write. And as we shall progress to the period of the Tabi'een, to the followers, those who come after the companions, you'll see that some of the most prolific writers and scholars are the freed slaves of prominent companions. They'll have an indelible mark and a monumental, noteworthy contribution that is made by these freed slaves. They're referred to as mawali, mawla. Mawla is the term we use in Arabic, mawla. Mawla is the freed slave of a person, right? Mawla. Wali is the slave master, if you like, right? So we'll see this. Mawla also referred to as a master as well. Mawla has many meanings in Arabic. I'm just going on a tangent because in Arabic, the scholar is also referred to as Mawlana amongst us. Mawlana. Na means ours. So Mawlana is our master, like this. Right? So continuing this discussion, then we looked at lots of examples of writing post-Islam. In the Meccan period, we looked at writing. In the Medinan period, we looked at writing. We looked at not just some individuals who could write, as we saw in the Meccan period, but then we started looking at institutions. We started looking at, if you like, madrasas. We started looking at what we can call them as maktabs, as they were referred to in the books of hadith and history. These are places of learning. So apart from the Prophet's mosque, there were a number of mosques in Medina in which students and people of Muslims in general were learning how to read and write, learning the Quran, learning hadith, X, Y, and Z. So all of this then points towards the direction that Islam, first and foremost, emphasized writing, emphasized literacy, and that they were writing, and lots of other indications that pointing towards this. And then we ended last lesson on not a controversial note, but a hadith that has been used by the Quranists to argue that hadiths should not have been preserved in writing. Right? The famous hadith in Sahih Muslim regarding the Prophet ﷺ saying, anyone who has written other than the Quran should erase it, they should destroy it, they should remove it, X, Y, and Z. And then we give the responses to that. we either questioned the hadith or that we interpreted in light of what the Prophet ﷺ did, especially during the latter periods of his career. So for example, we said in Hajjatul Wida', the farewell Hajj, when he gave the famous speech, after which a companion from Yemen, an elderly man who seems to have been a chieftain, he said to the Prophet ﷺ that, can I have this speech written down because my memory no longer serves me, and that I would like to have this speech conveyed to my people, to my tribe in Yemen. And the Prophet ﷺ turned to one of the companions and he said, "Uktubu li Abi Shah." Write it down for Abu Shah so that he can take this speech and he can convey it to the people of Yemen. This is the same speech in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ballighu anni walau ayah," that convey from me anything you have heard, even if it's one ayah, even if it's one verse, anything, you will relate it to others. Right? I want to hold on to this because we'll look at this critically in a moment. We'll look at it. We also looked at the scribes of the Prophet ﷺ. Last lesson, I talked about scribes. We said on and off, the Prophet ﷺ had about 90 scribes, 90 to 120 scribes. These are individuals who wrote for him formally in various phases. So he didn't have 90, 120 at the same time, but that individuals served as his scribes during various moments of history. And some of them were, we can say, permanent. So some were working on a temporary basis, others were permanent. We looked at that as well. And we are coming then to the end of this discussion. This discussion in Arabic is referred to as tadaween. Tadaween, that's ta, dal, waw, ya, noon. Tadween, tadweenul hadith, i.e. the development of hadith, how hadith came into being, and how hadith, especially in the written form, was gathered over the centuries, over the decades, over the centuries, if you like. And I'm trying to bring this to an end. I said, at least amongst the companion generation, we're going to end discussion today by looking at two areas that can be developed, and I've just put them there just to give you an idea that anybody who's interested in writing on this, looking at this, can actually still continue to look at this from various perspectives. So one of them is literacy amongst women. Literacy amongst women. And the other one is translation. So we saw the historical report from Baladuri that when Islam came, there were 17 individuals who could write in Makkah. And I said that this was a weak narration because of the isnad. So there's some weaknesses in its chain of transmission. There's some individuals missing. So the isnad is weak, but also because the list excludes some individuals regarding whom we know for certain that they could read and write. So for example, that list did not have Abu Bakr al-Anhu's name in it. When we know full well that Abu Bakr al-Anhu could read and write, right? He was a scholar before Islam came, right? So what we then said regarding that anecdote or that historical report is that it should be taken as a rough figure or a bare minimum and not the maximum. So that same report then continues. Let's have a look. Yes, the one in the box from Baladuri. That same report then talks about women. It says that when Islam came, there were 5 Arab women who could read and write in Makkah. Amongst them is Hafsa, that should be bint al-Khattab. Hafsa bint al-Khattab is whom? Do we know this lady, Hafsa bint al-Khattab? Hafsa bint al-Khattab is? Oh, you got Hafsa in the house as well, yes. Hafsa bint al-Khattab. Who's Hafsa bint al-Khattab, huh? Who is Hafsa? Yes, one of the Prophet's wives. And she's related to whom? Yes, right? That's one of them. But we will see a narration that questions this in a moment. We have Kulthum, right? We have Aisha bint Sa'ad, Karima bint Miqdad, and Ash-Shifa. We're going to look at this last one in a moment. Ash-Shifa al-Adawiyya, that's what she's known as, right? Shifa bint Abdullah al-Adawiyya. But what we're saying is that women in the pre-Islamic time did learn how to read and write, I also mentioned some poetry last lesson, if you remember, one of the earlier lessons, that we know of a number of schools, if you like, or a number of places where students went and learned how to read and write in Arabia. And one of them talks about a female, in poetry, a female who used to come and she used to smash all the ink pots, right? It's a, boys and girls fighting, right? So it's a girl that used to come in and she used to smash all the ink pots. So that's an indication that women also learned how to read and write, and this is an example. But before we move on to that, I think we're looking at what Islam has to say about this. Does Islam have a role in encouraging women to study and to educate themselves? And the answer we can say is yes. We can be affirmative in this. There's a number of ways we can argue this. So the most obvious one is the hadith which says طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم, right? That the pursuit of knowledge is an obligation على كل مسلم, upon every Muslim. Now, most people want to argue, or some people argue, that Muslim is masculine gender and therefore females are excluded. And then there's a weak narration or a weak variant which adds أو مسلمة. So طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم أو مسلمة. Or they say ومسلمة, that the pursuit of knowledge is obligatory upon every male and female Muslim. There's no need to argue this, actually. I don't think there's a need to argue this. The argument simply is that where you find the male gender in Arabic, it includes the female as well, right? That's the nature of Arabic. That where you have multiple genders, so whenever you have male and female coming together, then you use the male gender. It's as simple as that, right? Those of you who know Arabic will know this, that for example, if you have, let's say there's 5 people, of them there are 4 females and 1 male, you use the male gender, like that. That's how the Arabic works. So the argument that females are excluded doesn't really work. That's what we'll say regarding this hadith. Apart from that, this famous hadith in Bukhari regarding a slave girl. So the slave girl is basically a slave that you have who's a female. So the hadith says that whoever, or a person who has a slave girl, and then he educates her, علمها فأحسن تعليمها, that a person educated, that the master made arrangements for her education and made sure that she had a good education, وأدبها فأحسن تأديبها, and that he taught her good manners, right? And then frees her and marries her, will have 2 rewards, right? But what I wanted to highlight from this is the fact that this hadith is talking about educating a slave girl. So the reverse of this, if you like, or what I want to make an argument is an argument of a fortiori, which is that if there is Jannah, or if there is 2 rewards for educating a slave girl, what do you think is going to be the reward for educating one's own daughter, who's a free woman, by the way? Of course it's greater. Like this is the argument that you'd make. There's another hadith at the bottom. This hadith is slightly weak, hence I brought the one from Bukhari first, right? From Ibn Mas'ud, which says, the person who has a daughter who educates her well, teaches her good manners, and showers upon her from what Allah has given him. I.e., he gives whatever Allah has blessed him with from the rizq, from his wealth, he spends on her. He's saying that he will find her a veil and curtain for him from the hellfire. So on the Day of Judgment, she will be a veil and a curtain from hellfire. So this is no doubt. I don't see why we should be questioning the meaning of the hadith, even though there's a question mark around its isnad. Yeah. So what do you think the attitude of early Sahaba would have been then regarding women learning knowledge? No, there's none of the things, right? So this is one thing we can find. So going back to the 5 ladies then that we saw from the pre-Islamic period, I wanted to highlight this latter one called Shifa. Shifa was famous, right, because she used to write what we will call the tawiz. She used to write the ruqya in the Jahili period, right? So here there's a hadith, it's in Abu Dawud, hadith in Abu Dawud, at the bottom it says that Shifa came to the messenger after accepting Islam and inquired regarding an amulet she used to write to keep ants away. So in the Jahili period, she used to write the tawiz, right? And this taweez, what was its function? We know what it was for as well, is to keep the ants away, right? So she, after she embraced Islam, she was asking herself whether this is permissible or not. Whether this is permissible or not. Now, you may have heard on a number of occasions that taweez is shirk. Have you heard this before? Taweez is shirk. Do people say this? Yeah, you go to Saudi Arabia, if your kids are wearing taweez, they'll snatch it. The mutawwa will come snatch it, saying, shirk, take this away, this X, Y, and Z. The hadith, there is a hadith. The hadith says that whoever, istarqa is the word that's used. Istarqa is form 10 from ruqya, which is somebody who uses the ruqya. And ruqya, you know what it means, right? Is to hang the amulet that you place here, like this, or you tie it, wherever you want to tie it, right? So anyone who uses the ruqya has committed shirk. This is the hadith. It says, Man istarqa faqad ashrak. Faqad ashrak. But you have hadith we're going to see in a moment that the Prophet ﷺ allowed ruqya. So then there's a question as to how do we square this? Like there's like a contradiction of sorts that is coming through. On the one hand, you're saying it's shirk, on the other hand, it's allowed. How do we reconcile between this? It's simple. The answer is simple. The answer is that if the person is wearing the ruqya thinking that this thing is the savior, this thing that he is wearing is what is going to cure him and not Allah, this is shirk, no problem. This is shirk. Somebody who has full faith in this and not Allah, who is the one who allows X, Y, and Z to happen, shifa comes from Allah, then this is shirk. And this can be extended to all medicine. To all medicine. So you have a headache. If you think that not Allah, but this, let's say, paracetamol is what's going to cure you and not Allah, then this is shirk. You see, if you make ta'wil, i.e., if you say, well, it's like Allah has placed effect in everything. Yeah, so the job of, let's say, the fire is to burn, the job of the knife is to cut. Yeah, this is cause and effect. There's no harm in this for you to say, well, I'm taking this medicine because Allah has put effect in it, that's fine, not a problem. So if you're thinking like this, it's no problem. But if you're saying that, no, Allah has nothing to do with this, this itself is what's going to cure me, then this is considered shirk. So if somebody is wearing it, knowing that Allah is the one who's going to give me cure, but I'm wearing this as a means in the same way that I'm using medicine, this is not shirk. You see the difference between the two, like this. And yes, it goes without saying that whatever you've placed in it should not have any shirk in it. If you're calling out some God or some X, Y, and Z, then this is a given, this is definitely shirk, right? So hence, she asked, we have Shifa over here, she came to the Prophet ﷺ saying, look, I used to write this taweez, I used to write this ruqya to keep the ants away, can I use it? So look, the hadith says, after explaining how and what would be written, the Prophet said, teach this to Hafsa just as you have taught her how to write. So this is an endorsement that is permissible. Not only is it permissible, teach this to Hafsa and she'll use this as well. And we also have an indication that Hafsa learnt how to write from her. It's possible that she learnt after Islam, it's possible that she learnt before Islam, based on the Baladhuri statement above, that Hafsa bint al-Khattab and who else? Shifa bint Abdullah Adawiyya both knew how to write. So writing is, so this is something that I wanted to bring up. It's a question that is asked nowadays based on interests.
And typically what would be written? So in that case, what was
I honestly don't know. It doesn't mention.
I assume it would be like a Quranic ayah or something?
Yes.
In those days,
yes.
it would be some...
Well, they used to write verses down. They used to write things like, so there are examples of this. So if you know the ruqya that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu wrote to the Nile, if you remember. You heard this one? Yeah, so after the Muslims took over Egypt, once the Muslims conquered Egypt, well, whatever conquering means, because they gave up, right? There was no real bloodshed as such. The Christians in Fustat, which is nowadays Cairo, said that every year we need to sacrifice a virgin and throw it into the Nile. That way the Nile gives us water. The Nile gives us a good water. Otherwise, we'll have a drought. The water doesn't come. We need to feed the Nile. This is shirk. This is the pagan religion, right? So Amr ibn al-As, who was the governor, was thinking, we can't allow this under a Muslim state. We can't allow this. What shall we do? So then he wrote to Umar. And Umar anhu then wrote this famous taweez. He wrote a letter to the Nile, right, which was announced, like whatever the contents of the letter was first announced to the people, and then they put it into the water, and they say the next day water became double. But I know there are individuals who question this, especially the more modernist types, that it makes no sense. Why do you want to do this for? Well, actually, it does make sense. I think the reason why he wants to do it is not necessarily for the Nile, but for others to see, because he had the message conveyed to the people that it was written something like, from Umar ibn al-Khattab, O Nile, if Allah Rasul, the power of it is there, then you will give thingy, otherwise you'll go away like this. So it's a form of da'wah. I don't see a reason why you'd want to question it, because some people think that it's illogical, it makes no sense. It does make sense for the companion, of course it makes sense. Right? So people would write things like this, things of this nature. Yeah. In short, I think that's it. Does it? You remind me of incidents. That's why. So like, there's some incidents in the subcontinent where, as a famous scholar who was very much against all of this, and people would still come to him for taweez. So he wrote something like, if I remember correctly, the scholar wrote, "O Allah, I have told this slave of yours that I do not know, but he still insists. So if you want to give him shifa, give him shifa." This is what he written and given to him. And it worked. You see, so this is something about tawakkul, but this is what he wrote. So he was against it, but people kept coming, and he's saying, look, I don't know how to, this thing is beyond me, I don't know why you're asking me to make the right taweez, I don't know how to write taweez. But they're still saying, no, you have to write. So in the end, he wrote this. Because his students were saying, you don't write it. He goes, this is what I wrote, go check. And then they opened it, and this is what was written. That I don't know these things, this is not from me, but if you want to give him shifa, give him shifa. Finish. Yeah. But when we look at taweez nowadays, it's usually for children who are not able to recite the Quran. They keep it, there's Quran verses inside. Right? Anyway, let's move on to the next topic, which again hasn't necessarily been dealt with adequately. People can work on this in various ways. Is translation. So not only did the Arabs write, but they were in conversation with different languages. Right? The most immediate ones you can think of would be what languages? Aramaic, Syriac, Hebrew, right? Sister languages in and around the peninsula, right? So we know, for example, Waraq ibn Nawfal, who was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, who was a cousin of Khadija, whom Khadija took the Prophet ﷺ to, if you remember the famous story. He had become a Christian, and he translated, they say, the Injil, which would typically be the Gospels, into Arabic, or some say even Hebrew. So there's a question around whether he wrote it in Hebrew or whether he wrote it in Aramaic, but one of the two languages definitely he wrote them in. So Aramaic was around, Hebrew was around. They're not that different, by the way. Those of you who know Arabic or who've listened to them, at least on the ear, they're not so different. And remember that the script that they would be writing would also not be too dissimilar to it. So here you have from Abu Dawood, Zayd bin Thabit saying the following, that the Prophet ﷺ instructed me to learn the script of the Jews, i.e. the Hebrew, saying, I do not trust taking these Jews as my scribes. So if you want to communicate with other nations, so to speak, or the communities in Hebrew, rather than employing a Jewish person, the Prophet had Zayd learn Hebrew so he could write on his behalf. Because you don't know what they're writing, they could write something else, right? So he said, thus I mastered their script by 2 weeks and became his scribe when he needed to write to them and his reader when he received correspondence. So Zayd basically was the interpreter, translator, right? And look, he says, another narration from Tirmidhi, the Prophet ﷺ asked me to learn Syriac. Syriac again is not too different from Arabic and Hebrew. It's a Semitic language. Syriac was used in Iraq and in Jordan and thereabouts by the Jews and the Christians. It's a common language at the time, still used by Iraqi Jews and Iraqi Christians and Sabians, if you know who they are. The Sabi'in tend to use it as well, right? And then the last thing it says, this is Mas'udi, who's a historian from the early Abbasid period, late Umayyad period, So he claims that Zayd bin Thabit was well acquainted with Persian. It's put Yunaniya. So Yunan is Greek. So I don't know if that's Greek or if it's Latin. I put a question mark there. And Coptic and Abyssinian. Again, you might be thinking these are very like radically different languages. They're actually not, right? Abyssinian and Coptic were very similar to the Southern Arabian language. So Southern Arabia spoke a language that was slightly different to the north of the Arabian Peninsula. So when you're thinking of north, think of Syria, right? So, and think of what is now Tabuk. You have a place called Tabuk, the Battle of Tabuk. So it's Saudi Arabia, but the North Peninsula. They wrote a type of Arabic which we now call Kufic. So the Quran, the style of Arabic we write now, that is in the north, in the Kufic script. The Arabs from the south, the pre-Islamic Arabs from the south, wrote a language which is now called Musnad, or which I like to call the Himyarite language. And if you look at the Himyarite script, it's very similar to Hebrew and also to Abyssinian. So if you have any friends who are from Ethiopia, for example, look at their script and it looked very Hebrew-y, kind of very Hebrew type script. Same script that was very much used by in the Musnad. So the Musnad currently, I'm not sure if it's still used as a language. I'm not aware of Yemenis still speaking it, but it's still very much important in reading inscriptions. So again, if you know anything about Yemen, it's a very old civilization. And if you've seen pictures of Sana'a, it's all based in what? Mountainous regions. So you have huge inscriptions on mountains, right, in the Himyarite script. So you have, for example, 3rd century scholars who are Yemeni, who are from Himyar, like Imam Malik was from Himyar, the Ansar were from the Yemen area as well. They migrated to the north and resettled there. So you've got scholars who come, like Ibn Hisham is a famous scholar, who wrote like we can call it a key for anyone who wants to know the Himyarite script. So like you have the letter and this means A, like B. Like today how we access, let's say, hieroglyphics. You have this key. So he wrote key. There are a number of individuals who wrote keys for Arabs who themselves were Yemeni, saying, look, this is how you read our script, right? And the inscriptions go back many generations. We have some script, for example, from the time of Bilqis alayhi salam. We have inscriptions from the time of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. Still present there, you can see it in that script. So it's a very old script, right? So, and Abyssinian and Coptic, I'm saying this because the Yemen was an important civilization. If you think about the Queen of Sheba and during that time, its influence went beyond the Arabian Peninsula into what is now Abyssinia and Egypt as well. Hence, many historians have talked about when the Maqawqas gave the Prophet ﷺ as a gift a slave and a slave girl as well. Remember Maria Qibtiyya? She may not have been an Egyptian Copt, but actually of Arabic stock, of Arab blood. So it's not, again, not too alien. But anyway, these are some of the things that are there. So consider these in various ways to be then dialects rather than being completely different languages altogether. I think that's the point I want to drive home. Right, and this is something that isn't mentioned in the history books, but it's mentioned in one of our fiqh books. That, what is this? It is said the Persians wrote to Salman al-Farsi. So Salman al-Farsi, after he converted to Islam and during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, when they took over essentially and conquered the Persian Empire, right? The capital of the Persian Empire was, I forget the name in English, but it's Madain. Madain is the name is the Arabic name. It's in modern day Iraq. They're not in Iran. That was the capital of the Sassanid Empire. Again, we talk about Persians and Romans, but the actual name of the Roman Empire is the Byzantium Empire, right? And when we talk about the Persians, we're talking particularly about the Sassanid Empire. And Salman was made the governor of Iran, so of the empire. So again, this is some bittersweet irony, if you like, that here is Salman, who went in pursuit of the truth, who was, if you remember, enslaved on his way to Medina, right? He wanted to go, but he was taken as captive and as a slave, who endured, and he's seeing, the end of basically what was one of the most magnificent empires of the day, the superpower of the day, and he's been made the governor, right? So it is said the Persians wrote to Salman al-Farsi asking him to write down Surah Fatiha, right, in Persian. And Sarakhsi, who's a Hanafi, said that they used to recite this in prayer until their tongues got used to Arabic. This is one of the dalils that is used. Again, this is going back to the early period. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was of the opinion that you could recite Surah Fatiha in Persian, or you could read Salah in Persian. It's not a position that we uphold at the moment, but Sarakhsi, who is an early Hanafi jurist, is giving dalil for this via this narration. Right? Ala kulli hal, so translation was something that I wanted to bring up. Right. Other than this, we'll move on now from these two aspects to very quickly looking at then some examples. Do we have examples of companions having written works? And where are they at the moment? These are the two big questions. So I think we've said enough about companions they did write. The question is, what did they write, and do we have examples, do we have samples of their writing existing today? So here are some more examples, and I'm going to pick out some of the more prolific transmitters of hadith, because they serve as better examples than some of the more remote ones. So Ibn Abbas, look at this. Ibn Abbas, regarding him we have Ibn Abbas. I saw Ibn Abbas with slates writing something on the Prophet's practice from Abu Rafi', right? His son Ali is saying, my father left behind around a camel load worth of writing. I copied it from him. Camel load, the luggage you put on, right? And Abu Rafi' handed me a piece of writing. It's called Istiftah. When we do takbir in prayer, Allahu Akbar, and then what do we read before Surah Fatiha, right? That's called Istiftah, the opening invocation. Well, you guys probably know Thana, Subhanakallahumma. There's a couple of other ones, this one, so right. Abu Rafi' handed me a piece of writing. What was it? It was this Subhanakallahumma. It's the dua Istiftah. Right, we have Anas bin Malik, who's the companion of the Prophet ﷺ and also one of his assistants, right? We call him Khadim Rasulillah, that's what he's referred to as. He served the Prophet ﷺ for roughly 10 years. So for 10 years of his life, he was the Khadim of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So Anas is saying, preserve knowledge through writing, and no, we've gone to the same ones. This one I think I wanted to bring, sorry. This is a long story. I'll save you the story, but just this here. There's a hadith, and what can you see this at the bottom? So it's a meeting that Anas has had in Medina regarding some of the hypocrites and how his uncle was freed of blame. And in the end, we're just going to see this here. The Prophet ﷺ said, no one who bears witness of there being no God but Allah and I am His messenger should enter the fire, nor should it devour him. Anas said, I was amazed by this hadith, so I turned to my son and commanded him to write it down. Write it down. It's a wonderful statement like this. We'll skip this. Right, so in short then we have three methods of preservation, we said, right? Memory, practice, and writing. Yeah, this is important. So preservation, can you see we have, it's this part we're focusing on, the writing. There were two types of writing. I've said there were formal writing, informal writing. Formal writing, or we were saying political tracts, we saw above, right? Important ones. Informal ones is where I'm writing my own notes, where in order for me to remember the things that I need to remember, I'll make some notes, right? So they're not intended for public consumption. They're not written so that I can publish it. In my own notes, I want to keep a copy of them in case I forget, things like this. So, like I said, I want to look at some of these companion writings. And before we begin, just there's a name there that I want to get familiar with. It's Sahifa. Sahifa is what we call the genre of writing which the companions wrote. Yeah, small. You can call them parchments if you like. You can call them notebooks if you like. We can call them. It's not a major, don't think of it as a multi-voluminous. It's just maybe it's a page maybe it's 2-3 pages like this, because like I said, we've talked about writing, paper wasn't around at the time, the writing materials were very expensive. Also note, this is something that we'll look at in more detail, since writing was not something that they did often, and also given that materials were scarce, even what they wrote was very brief. So one thing you'll realize about the prophetic speech, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, is that he spoke in very little words with profound meaning, right? They're marked by what? Their conciseness. And that is, I think, a salient feature of pre-Islamic and early Islamic writing before even paper comes. So if you look at the writing of companions, if you look at the speeches that they gave, they try to be as brief as possible. And like, for example, nowadays, those of you who read Urdu or those of you who read novels, you give multiple similes, for example, or for the same thing. You're very descriptive. They're not as descriptive in writing especially, right? In fact, what you'll find are small sentences of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 words. That's it, that's a sentence, nothing more than this, right? So this is something that I think we might want to bear in mind. So what are some of the companion collections, the Sahifas? So you've got one here. Rafi' ibn Khadij had a piece of writing in which it was mentioned Medina is a sanctuary. He had it written down because the companions knew that Makkah is a sanctuary. It's coming from which period? From the pre-Islamic period. The Quraysh knew this, right? The pagan Arabs knew this. But the Prophet ﷺ announced Medina as a haram as well. So this is something new. Medina wasn't a haram before the Prophet ﷺ settled there. So look, Medina is a sanctuary. Do you know sanctuary is a haram? What does haram mean? Anyone know haram? So we know haram, isn't it? Haram means what? Prohibition, something that is not allowed. We wear the ihram, which is form 4 of haram, i.e. we impose haram upon us. When you're in the state of ihram, certain things that were otherwise permissible are not permissible now. In ihram, you're not allowed to hunt, for example. In ihram, you're not allowed to apply perfume, for example. In ihram, you're not allowed to cut your hair. These are things that were otherwise permissible. Yeah. So harama, the 3 letters. In the same way, the takbir, this takbir is called what? Takbir tahrima is the takbir that makes it haram. What does it make haram? You see, right now I'm talking to you, right now I'm looking around, all this is permissible. But once you're in prayer, things that were otherwise permissible are no longer permissible. You see this? So in prayer, you can't eat now. You can't be standing up in prayer and eating or taking the phone and call X, Y, and Z. And what do you call the salam then? You call it tahliliya. So it's a salam that makes it halal, like this. So haram is an area in which certain things are now what? Haram. It's a sacred place. In short, it's a sanctuary, it's a sacred place. Right? What do we know about the haram? Its trees will not be felled. Yeah, its trees will not be torn. You won't cut its grass. You won't kill any of its animals as game. X, Y, and Z. These are the things. So look, Medina is a sanctuary, and it says the Messenger of Allah, may Allah's blessing, declared it so. We have written this upon Khawlani leather. So we also find what some of the materials were that they were writing on. Khawlan, they say, is a place in Yemen, south, right? So we've got leather from Khawlan, and this is an example, right? This is the famous one that I've been talking about. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he had a sahifa that was called Sadiqa. Sadiqa. From Sadiq. Sadiq means someone who's truthful. So this was the truthful parchment. And this companion, regarding him, Abu Huraira, we know Abu Huraira, he's the most prolific transmitter, right? Abu Huraira himself said that no companion has more hadith than me, except perhaps what Abdullah ibn Amr has. This is because he used to write and I did not. Even though statistically we argue that Abu Huraira actually is more prolific, but he himself is saying, actually, if there's somebody who has more hadith than me, it's Abdullah. Why? Because he used to write in the Prophet's time. He used to write in the Prophet's time, right? And I think I've mentioned this, that he used to write everything, to the extent that some of the Quraysh were saying to him, why are you writing everything for? Not everything is, you're not supposed to write everything the Prophet is saying or doing. Only say the things that you think are necessary or what he says as Prophet, and then he goes and consults the Prophet. And the Prophet said, no, everything that I say is wahi, you can write it all down. So you wrote everything down, right? So what did he say about this? This is what he himself would say this. This is the Sadiqah which I heard directly from the Prophet without any intermediaries. So I heard it directly from his voice. If this, i.e. the Sadiqah, the book of Allah and what was kept safe for me, I do not care for the world. So this is his own saying. As he moved to Egypt, he would say, if there are three things in my world, I don't care about the world. What is it? This Sahifa that I have, that I've written the Prophet's words. Number two, the Quran. And the three is, Wahaz was the name of a land that was given as waqf, that he used to cultivate, and he used to then give his proceeds as a zakat and a sadaqah to the Baytul Mal. So it's a big piece of land that he was overseeing, farmland if you like, agricultural land. Yeah. And then, right, so look, this hadith that Rafi' ibn Khadij had in Khawlani leather makes its way into which book? Sahih Muslim, right? Also note that this Sahifa, Sadiqa, is a famous one, and this makes its way into a number of books, which we shall see. It's in the Sunan Tirmidhi, it's in Musnad Ahmad, it's a number of books. It's referred to as Amr ibn Shu'aib an Abihi an Jaddihi. We'll talk about isnads later on. But I'll just, in short, what is it? Amr ibn Shu'aib, from his father, from his grandfather, Abdullah ibn. So this Sahifa, in short then, stayed within the family. Hence the isnad is what? Amr ibn Shu'aib, from his father, from his grandfather, who is Amr ibn al-As, or Abdullah ibn Amr al-As. So you can see that it was passed down in the family, and hence whoever wanted to narrate it would have to go to the great grandson or the grandson. Right, Ali ibn Abi Talib, look, he himself said in Sahih al-Bukhari that we have nothing besides the book of Allah and this parchment. So he would show the parchment, right? What was the parchment? This parchment, they say he used to keep in his sword. In his sheath, he used to wrap it around and he used to open it up. And what was in it? You've got over here, look, Ali gave a talk in which he said, we have no book which we read except for the book of Allah, the Exalted, and Ta'ala, and this parchment. In it is penalties, the teeth of camels, and Medina is sanctuary. What are penalties? Do you know what penalties are? If you break someone's leg, if you were to injure this animal, if you were to kill someone or to damage someone, you have to pay this in return, like this. And when he says the teeth of camels referring to if you break the teeth of a camel, then what do you have to pay? You have damages, liabilities like this. And Medina is a sanctuary. We talked about this previously. Rafi' bin Khadij had one, that Medina is a sanctuary. Right? This again finds its way in which one? Sahih Muslim and in the Bukhari as well. He may also have had, if I'm not mistaken, Ali ibn Abi Talib may have also had the nisab of zakat. Do you know what the nisab of zakat is? Zakat, if you have this many camels, then you give this much in zakat. If you have this many sheep, then you give this much in zakat. But this was originally written by Abu Bakr al-Anhu. Abu Bakr had written it, and he had passed it on to Anas, this some people say, and some people say that Ali also made a copy of this, of the nisab of zakat. Right, Anas bin Malik is saying, when Sulaym took her son Anas to the boy, we know this, I talked about this a minute ago, that Anas bin Malik, he served the Prophet ﷺ for 9.5 to 10 years as his khadim. And this was the beginning that, look, Sulaym is his mother's name, that took the boy. He said, this is my son, he's a young boy and he knows how to write. So look, before she's even taking Anas, the boy, to the Prophet's thingy that you can take him as a khadim, he knew how to write. This is an important point, right? And he says, look, whenever we would take lots of hadith from Anas, he would bring out a jar and say, these I heard from the Messenger of Allah, I wrote them down and presented them to him. Look, so you have a form of writing. Yes, here we've got the book of Sadaqah. That the Prophet had a book of Sadaqah. Nowadays we say Sadaqah is what? Donation. But in the Quran, Sadaqah it means zakat. Yeah, so remember, Sadaqah is donation. Nowadays we don't consider Sadaqah synonymous to zakat. We say zakat, you're giving zakat lillah Sadaqah, like this, right? But actually in the Quranic usage, Sadaqah is for zakat and non-zakat as well. Yeah, so when the Quran says, for example, to the Prophet ﷺ, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً, the Prophet is being told, take from the wealth of the believers sadaqah. Yeah, he is talking about zakat over here. إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينَ. The 8 places where zakat needs to be given, Quran saying إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ, that sadaqat, donations, belong to the fuqara, the masakin, amini alayha, and so on and so on. But actually, sadaqat is plural. Sadaqah is referring to zakat over here as well. Alright, so the Prophet had a book of sadaqah written. He did not send it out to his governors until he passed away, and he attached it to his sword. Look here, when he passed away, Abu Bakr observed it until he passed away, then Umar acted upon it then until he passed away. So you had this book of sadaqah. This is found in Abu Dawood, by the way, the long hadith. You can see, if you look at the isnad, of how the Umayyad governors had access to this. The Umayyad governors, so we know, like for example, the 4 khulafa, right? We have the 4 khulafa is whom? Abu Bakr, and then Umar, Uthman, Ali, and then Hassan for 5 to 6 months, and then Muawiyah, and Muawiyah begins the Umayyad dynasty, like this. So it stays within Muslim rulers. Hamad ibn Salama, excellent, look, he's saying, Hamad ibn Salama from Basra, I took from Thumama ibn Abdullah ibn Anas. So who's this? Anas ibn Malik, who we just saw a minute ago, and this is his grandson, Thumama ibn Abdullah ibn Anas. So Hamad ibn Salama is a contemporary to Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, very famous tabi'i. He's known for his zuhud, is an important narrator. So he's saying that I took basically from the grandson of Anas bin Malik, a book which he thought Abu Bakr sent to Anas when he sent him as a zakat collector, and it had the Prophet's seal on it, because Abu Bakr anhu had sent Anas as a zakat collector to Bahrain, what is now Bahrain, that area. So he's assuming, the grandson is assuming that this letter that we have the stamp on is actually the book of Sadaqah. Right. Very quickly, we'll look at this, and do we have time? How much time have we got left? Okay, let's have a look. Let's just have a look at this. So this is something that is often cited. This is a list of the most prolific transmitters of hadith. So in case it's a question that who narrated the most hadiths, right, these are typically the numbers that you'll be given. So Abu Huraira has the total number of reports, the highest number of reports, there are 5,374. Ibn Umar, as you can see, has 2,630. Anas bin Malik has 2,286, and Aisha has 2,210. Ibn Abbas has 1,660. What's worth noting over here is that all of these are junior companions. Yeah, they're not senior ones. They were relatively young when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. Yeah. So there's a number of things you can say regarding this. The senior ones were busy in administration, with jihad, in the affairs of state, X, Y, and Z. The other one we can say is, and this is quite common, if, for example, you were a young child when you were around a very charismatic figure, and you see that entire generation, and then you see another generation and lots of differences going on, then you'd be the one that would be curious in wanting to write a biography of sorts and preserve notes, X, Y, Z. You'd be the one that would be going around trying to, like, imagine you had a grandfather who was a big scholar or was a huge figure, and you know, you remember him a little, but you don't know more about him. You'd be the one, if as a biographer then, you'd be ideal to then go and speak to the children, his students, X, Y, and Z, and try and collect as many things as you can. And this is naturally what was going on at the time. Yeah. Look at each of these individuals more detail, as Imam Nawawi himself narrates hadith from them. The other thing I think worth mentioning over here is that these reports, where do we get them from? It's very important. This is a question. People often just, these reports does not mean that Abu Huraira spoke 5,374 different things. Right? This is not what this means. Right? I've put here in at the bottom over here where these figures are taken from. They're taken from a book by Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm is a 4th century scholar. Ibn Hazm took these numbers from a work which is no longer extant, it no longer exists amongst us. It's called Musnad Baqi ibn Makhlid. Musnad Baqi ibn Makhlid. This is the name of a scholar from Andalus. Ibn Hazm was from Andalus as well. He was a qadi and a judge, so he was part of the administration. I believe he is buried nowadays in the island of Ibiza, is that what you call it? Where people go clubbing, right? Ibiza, that place and Mallorca, I believe, were the two places where he was serving as a judge, right? Yeah, those are areas, you know. Nowadays, the completely different areas, right? But those are the two areas where he served, Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah. And Baqi ibn Makhlid is a very interesting figure. He's a figure that is worth looking into. He is said to have had the largest musnad in the world. Musnad, you can say, is a collection of hadiths, right? He's an interesting figure, Baqi, because he traveled to the east on 2 occasions. So he's from Andalus, Baqi is from Andalus, and he traveled to the east on 2 occasions, and both times his travel lasted more than a decade. So I think the first time he went, it lasted about 13 years. The second trip he made lasted about 20 years. Imagine this person, right? And they say that whenever he traveled, he would walk. He's a tall person, and a tall person used to walk in a certain way. There's a wonderful story about him and Imam Ahmad, that by the time he got to Baghdad, Imam Ahmad was imprisoned, house prison. And he had traveled all the way to, obviously he took hadith on the way, but his main intention was to narrate from Imam Ahmad. And Imam Ahmad is under house imprisonment, so what are you going to do? So he, according to the narration, what they say is, he dressed up as a beggar, foreigner, knocking on everyone's door that, can I have money, can I have money? And then he ended up at Imam Ahmad's house. He knew who he was, but he's acting like he's a beggar. Imam Ahmad came out saying, what is it that you want? And then he told him that, look, I've come from Andalus to take hadith from you. Imam was like, I'm in the house prison, do you not know this? He says, yes, I know this, I heard from the mosque, this is what happened. So they struck a deal. The deal was that every day he'd come to beg, but actually Imam Ahmad would give him 10 hadith, on the condition that whatever he said in the mosque, he'd give him exchange like this. And like that, they say that until Imam Ahmad remained in the house prison, he gathered like hundreds of hadith like this, And then obviously once Imam Ahmad is no longer under house imprisonment, then he becomes Shaykhul Islam. And Imam Ahmad himself said that the government had tested him twice. The first time was through persecution, and then the second time was through what? Just showering him with lots of gifts. He's like, why don't these people leave me alone? Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's something else, but he became Shaykhul Islam, and he became very uncomfortable with this. In the end of his life, he's saying, Allah, you tested me with sabr, and now you're testing me with all this, all this affluence, all this wealth, all this. This is not what I am. I just want to live a normal life, peaceful life. So obviously, once he becomes Shaykhul Islam, then there's narrations of Baqi also having a privileged position amongst Imam Ahmad. So there's a wonderful story they narrate about how once once Imam Ahmad is now free, he's Shaykhul Islam, he's teaching in the mosque, and one day he asks, where's Baqi? Where's Baqi? I can't see him amongst the students. And they said that he's ill. Someone said he's ill. So Imam Ahmad said, today there's no class, let's go see him. We're going to go see Baqi. Now these are things that really you can see their relationship. The one thing I didn't mention is when Baqi went to Imam Ahmad, whilst he's in house imprisonment, and he said that I'm here to take hadith from you, there's some wonderful lines that Imam Ahmad said. Imam Ahmad says, you come all the way from Andalus. You come all the way from Andalus, people like you then should not be neglected. This is part of hospitality. If he's come all this way, then I must give him something, and hence they struck this deal. So they say that Imam Ahmad then was walking from the mosque to see Baqi, and Baqi was lodging at someone's house. As you would do as a student, he's lodging. Baqi himself says that I was very ill, and my books were my pillow, because he's a poor person, he has no wealth. His books are his pillow, and he's sweating, and all he remembers hearing is the landlady and the landlord, everyone saying, oh look, that's Shaykhul Islam coming, Shaykhul Islam, and Imam Ahmad's coming. And they don't realize that he's actually coming to their house. Right? So Baqi mentioned that they weren't the most hospitable landladies and landlords, but once Imam Ahmad had come in, Imam Ahmad then sat by his head and saying, Baqi, you haven't come to class, what's going on? He said, look, I'm ill. And then Imam Ahmad said a poem, and the poem was, when you are healthy, you can travel continents, and when you're ill, then you can't even come to the mosque. This is the gist of the poem. And then he made dua for him, and then they left. And Baqi said that, after they left, the landlady and the landlord showed me so much hospitality that even my family wouldn't. If I was at home and I was ill, they wouldn't look after me this much. So these are some of the wonderful things that of the past. So Baqi's musnad is supposed to be the most thorough musnad available in the world. So Ibn Hazm, who had a copy of this, then did a index count, if you like, of how many narrations does this companion have, how many narrations this companion, how many narrations this companion have, like this. And so what he did was he did the count. And this is the count that everyone relies on. But there are a number of things that we need to keep in mind. One of them is isnad growth. What do you mean by isnad growth? So look, the companion said something, standard, look, let's take this room as an example, right? So say I'm a companion and you guys are followers, right? You guys are tabi'een. I will be teaching you guys, right? You guys will be teaching your classes, and those classes, each individual will be teaching another class, like this. So what you're seeing is, in every generation, there's isnad growth. There's isnad growth. What if, as a companion, let's say I said the hadith once, this doesn't happen, you'd be teaching for years and years and years, and if I'm a teacher, I wouldn't just teach once, would I? I wouldn't just teach like a hadith once in my life and that's it, I'm done. No, career-wise, you're constantly having students coming and going, like this. So over a span of like 20 years, 30 years, how many companions, how many students do you think you'd have? You'd have a number of students, right? Let's say in the hundreds, if not more, right? Each of these 100 then, as a tabi'i, would then have more students than the tabi'een. Because you're having more converts, you're having more Muslims, and also you're having more people who are invested in the business of teaching and learning and committing it to writing. So in essence, what am I saying? Every generation you have isnad growth. Isnad grows like this. So what's very much possible is this number that you have from Abu Hurairah, it's likely that actually there's only 500 things in there. He said 500 separate things, but each thing has been narrated by so many different variants that it's become 5,000 just there like this. It's become 500 like this. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? So this number does not equate to him having said 5,374 different things. If anything, it might be like 10%, and the rest are just variant isnad. Because what the muhaddith would do, what Baqi, for example, would do, we look at the musnad in more detail. I wanted to do it later, but let's talk about the musnad. What is the musnad? So the musnad is a genre of writing. Like you see, 40 hadith is a genre of writing. What do you think the 40 hadith comprises of? 40 hadith, it's a compilation of 40 hadith, it's in the name, right? The musnad is a compilation of hadiths or of statements from the Prophet ﷺ arranged via the companion. So think of a dictionary, right? The dictionary, what's the first letter that we're going to have? A, B, C, D, like this. So what typically a musnad would begin with, the Ashara Mubashara, the 10. So from the 10 you have Abu Bakr who'd come first, and then Umar and Uthman, like this. And then you'd have the 10. After the 10 you'd start with a companion whose name begins with Alif, and then a companion with Ba, companion with Ta, companion with Tha, companion with, like this. And what you do is you'd collect all of the narrations of Abu Bakr, for example, all of the narrations of Umar. It doesn't matter what the topic is. It doesn't have to be like nowadays. If you pick up a fiqh book, for example, if you pick up a book of jurisprudence, the first chapter you'd find is what? Purification of tahara. And in tahara you start with wudu, and then ghusl, and then perhaps tayammum, and then masah al-khuffayn, and like this. So after the book of purification you'd have what? You'd have salah. After salah you've had zakat, like this. There's a sequence. It's all based on theme and topic. It's topically arranged. The musnads aren't like this. The musnad is just a dictionary. So hadith number 1 could be on tawbah, hadith number 2 could be on heaven, as long as you've got that companion in mind, like this. So what would happen is, if you look at how they would systematize it, it's back growth. So you see right now, what did I say? I said, let's say I'm the companion, you guys are the followers. Then each of you had 10, let's say, and then those 10 had how many? Another 10, like this. So the muhaddith, what he's doing is, he's basically going backwards, i.e. he's going to your students, collecting all of their isnads, right? Collecting their narrations from the one teacher, so 10 per one teacher, 10 one teacher like this, and then from your 10 students, he's bucking it to you 10, for example, and then you 10 to myself like this, what we call clusters. And why do they do this? Do you know why they would do this? To look for irregularities. Very important. What do they look for? Irregularities. So for example, we've got 10 over here. All 10 of you are in agreement, exact same wording that the companion has said. Now from each of your 10 students, one is saying the complete different thing. He's got it wrong, he's forgotten it, or he's changed the meaning. So the muhaddith is able to detect what we call anomalies, irregularities. He put a question mark on this. And then once he's pieced it together that look, this classroom, the teacher, all 10 are saying this and he's saying this is wrong, this is suspect. Can you see what he's doing? Like this. But in essence, what we're saying, just to verify this one hadith that I said, he's had to go through how many? 10 plus each 10 have got another 10, so that's 100. And then from each of them, you've got 1,000. You see, so 1,000 plus 100 plus 10, like that. Through this process, he'd verify a hadith. You see what again? So this is how the Muslim would work, and these are the companions that we have over here, right?
Like Chinese whispers, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's a science though. It's a science. You have to verify. Verification of this is very important, and this is how a muhaddith would work. So this work, as you're seeing, by Baqi then is a 4th century one. Wadih. So there are two things that I think I want to end with over here. The first thing is, he didn't say, Abu Hurairah didn't say 5,374 things, number one. This is the important thing, right? The other thing is, can there be more narrations? This is another question. Can there be more narrations? Because these are the narrations that Baqi gathered, isn't it? Baqi collected these in his Musnad. Can there be ones that he's missed? At least logically we'll say, yeah, it's possible. And therefore, this is just a net figure. Remember that this figure is not set in stone. This is what I keep saying, that people treat these figures as though they're set in stone, and they don't often even know where these numbers have come from. Right? I've told you where they come from. They come from Ibn Hazm. Where's Ibn Hazm got them from? From Baqi's Musnad. And because Baqi's Musnad was one of the best Musnads, one of the most exhaustive ones, and one of the it had the highest number of hadiths given at the time. This is why he's relied on this one and not any other work. Right? Baqi comes.
You can put all those in brackets next to it. So 5,300 is actually 500, 2,600.
Yes. So look. I said a minute ago. Yeah, no. So I've said it right now, haven't I? I've said it to you guys that Baqi is a student of Imam Ahmad. Right? Imam Ahmad's Musnad is with us, by the way. Imam Ahmad's Musnad is available. It's about in 56 volumes. If you take away the indexes and everything else, you're looking at about 50 volumes, give or take. Right? There's a scholar from Egypt called Ahmad Muhammad Shakir. He's, if I remember correctly, Musnad Ahmad has the hadith of Abu Hurairah to about 5,000 or just shy of 5,000. So it's like 4,900, like this. And so, what did I say? Every generation you're going to have growth. So what tells us the difference? So you can say, for example, like from, let's say 5,000, right? Imam Ahmad's generation, you've got 5,000 in his Musnad, and Baqi's you've got 374 more. Why? Because I keep telling you about isnad growth, because each teacher students going to have more students, and each teacher going to have more students given the generation as they go down, like this. And as I was saying, Ahmad Muhammad Shakir then studied the hadith of Abu Hurairah from the Musnad Ahmad. And I think in his study, he says something like, even though this is a huge number, Abu Hurairah actually only, I think in about 40 hadiths, does he say something that no other companion has said. Does this make sense? Because Abu Hurairah is a later companion. He becomes Muslim in Medina. He's not an early companion. And so when you do like a cross-reference that, what is he saying that no other companion has said, right? Actually, it's not a huge number. You will find other companions have said the same thing that Abu Hurairah said, like this, right? But why is it that, your question was, why is it that you've given such a big number? Yeah, it's because the author, the one who collected this, actually was making an index for Baqi's Musnad. So Baqi ibn Makhlid, the book I told you, which is the largest given Musnad, he was just gathering all the hadiths that are in there, that there's this many hadiths in this, under this companion, this many hadiths under this companion, this many hadiths under this companion. It's actually a thick volume. I've written the name here. It's called Asma'u Sahabati Ruwat wa ma li kulli wahidi min al-haddad, which literally means names of companion transmitters of hadith and what number each has narrated. How many hadith each person has narrated, like that. So here's a chapter, those above the thousands, those under the thousands, those who've narrated between 500 to 1,000, those who've narrated less than 100, those who've narrated 2, like this, those who narrated 1, like that, and just gives numbers like that. That's it. Right? But it's all, like I said, based on Baqi's Musnad. Yes, the question.
So, yeah, so you know, like for example, say if we say for Abu Hurairah, we're saying it's about, say, if we say 10%, it might be 20%, right? So let's say 500. Then that strikes me as, like, how many hadith are we talking, were there in total? Because that sounds quite low.
Yeah, very good. This is what I want to come to next.
Oh,
Yeah, excellent. So, what time do we have? Let's have a look at this. This is next lesson. We'll look at this. So, what is that? So, this is a question that really strikes me odd. Personally, it strikes me odd in the sense that how many companions were there? Number one. This is one question that I think is worth asking, because my assumption. This is my assumption. You can agree or disagree with me on this. My assumption is that if you are a companion, then you would have said something about the Prophet ﷺ to those who have not seen him. Do you agree or disagree? Say you're a Bedouin, for example, and you've seen the Prophet ﷺ, that gives you the status of a companion. You are a Sahabi now. You're going back to your people. Obviously, you have a rank amongst the people. He's a Sahabi now. What, will you not have anything to say about the Prophet ﷺ? Will you not even say that I saw him and this is what he was like, X, Y, and Z? This is a hadith. Remember, we said anything about him even. So I saw him, let's say, in the Hajjatul Wida, in the farewell Hajj. He was on top of a camel and he was wearing X, Y, and Z clothes, and he went around and then he gave this speech. Even just this much is what a hadith then, because you have something to say about him.
yeah.
So,
I saw the Prophet wear something on a certain day.
this.
It's like
Huh?
human nature, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's the case. Like, imagine someone famous, you met someone famous. Of course you're going to brag about it, right? Oh, I met X, Y, and Z person. The king came and, he came like this, X, Y, and Z. I think it's natural, right? So this is one thing that we want to talk about. That, number one, how many companions were there? Because I'm assuming, I'm happy to justify to myself, I'm happy to use this as a methodology, that if we have an exact number of how many companions there were, minimum they would have had one thing to say. Minimum, bare minimum, they would have said something about the Prophet, right? Then the question is, currently, if we take the 6 books, the Sihah Sitta we have in front of us, right? How many companions can we get? Or if we were to take all the hadith data we have in front of us right now, what's the total number of companions that we get? Like that. This is what I'm trying to do over here. So we have a number of hadith works that are published today. So apart from the 6 books, you've got the Musannafat, the Masanid, X, Y, and Z, we will look at next lesson. The question is, from these, if we were to backtrack now, so go through all of the Sihah Sitta, go through the Bukhari, Muslim, see how many companions can we isolate from this, and what's the total number we get, and compare this total number to the actual total number of companions that there were. And then we need to ask this question, why and this happened. I'll just give you I'll give you part of the answer, right? Because I know you're probably thinking what's going on over here, right? So they've said that the companions actually were so many in number that they can't really be accounted for. This is what they say. They say that because there was no formal census, there was no formal survey of who's living where, right? This is number one. There are some, nonetheless, odd figures that we find. So we say, for example, there were 150,000, there were 125,000 in Hajjatul Wida. But remember, these are not all of the companions, because there were many companions who didn't make it to the farewell Hajj. You see where I'm coming from, right? So this is one. Another example they give is of the Battle of Hunain, the Battle of Tabuk. The only thing it says there about these 2 battles, that there were so many in number, they couldn't be accounted for via a register. They say, لا يحصيهم الديوان. The Diwan is something where anyone who joins the battle would have his name put in. He'd have his name registered, because once they get the war booty, they will distribute it according to who's around like this. This is what they would do. So the hadith is saying there were so many number, the register wouldn't be enough for them. That's just giving you how many there were. But generally speaking, they say that there's no real number. But even if we were to take these figures, how many? 150,000. There's one narration actually who Imam Bukhari's teacher was asked. So somebody asked Imam Bukhari's teacher that a person has said there are about 150,000 companions. What do you think? And he said something that is somewhat humorous. He said, whoever said this, may Allah break their jaws. They are lying. They are lying. And then he says, you can't account for them. There's too many of them. Right? So this is, you can, let's just take 150,000 as a guide number, because that's the number that we have about them being in the farewell Hajj. If we now backtrack based on all the hadith data that we have in front of us, how many companions do we get out of it? Do you know? We get roughly, I'd say a generous, come on, let's be generous. Generous number is 2,000 or 1,500. 1,500. Imam Dhahabi says 1,500, and he says, لا يبلغون ألفين أبدا. You'd never reach 2,000. So the question is, what's happened? What's happened? Clearly, they would have had a lot of things to say, but why have we gone from 150,000 companions, who all of whom would have had something to say, to now only knowing about 1,500? There's a process that we'll talk about next lesson, right? That Umar radiallahu anhu had a regulatory process. He made sure that whoever wanted to say something would say it, and it would have to be verified and accredited. So the process through which this knowledge has come to us, right? To ensure that whoever is narrating properly, and number two, that no one gets to lie. Very important. There's certain things that take place in the history of Islam where the companions then are guided to take these precautionary measures. And that's why then the companions that we do know, and the companions that are then are narrators, are from very important families, number one. So they're not like random figures from the periphery. These are from the houses of Islam. These are people that you definitely have heard of. They're the children of the Khulafa. They're coming from the 10. They're coming from the Badriyin. These are very important people, right? People whose motives you simply cannot question. These are people who's like we talk about, we associate them with Islam. Right? Look at these individuals you have over here, right? Ibn Umar, right? And you have Anas bin Malik, Aisha ibn Abbas from the family, very important individuals. I think so this is something we'll look at inshallah next lesson. Right? Very quickly, I think these are some names I don't think I want to ponder on this next lesson, so we'll go through this. So these individuals then, the 5 that you have over here, what I've got over here are, they've got tons of transmitters, they've got tons of students, but these are students who wrote from them specifically. Does that make sense? So if you go on the Abu Hurairah, you'll find easy 200, 300 transmitters from them, but these are individuals who wrote from them. And this one is an important one, this one here. We'll revisit this later on. Hammam ibn Munabbih has a very famous sahifa from Abu Hurairah, which was found, I think, in Germany in around the 1920s, 1950s, 40s or so, right? So this is an example of a sahifa, very early text that this individual Hammam narrated from Abu Hurairah. It's still available separately. So whereas the previous books that we saw, or the previous sahaif, we said they've been absorbed in the Bukhari, in Abu Dawood and the Musnad, this one also is absorbed. You'll find his narrations in Bukhari, you'll find the entire sahifa in Musnad Ahmad, you'll find it all in Musnad Ahmad, but it was preserved and narrated separately as well. Right? The person who narrated it from him, who we have it through, is a person called Ma'mar. We will look at Ma'mar next lesson as well. Ma'mar from Basra, he traveled to Yemen. He's from Yemen, by the way, from Sana'a. And he said that I narrated this book from Hammam. The words he uses is, his eyebrows had fallen into his eyes. What's that a sign of? So old. He's become so old that his basically eyes are drooped. And he's saying that he read half of it to me, then he ran out of breath. There's about 150 hadiths in this Sahifa, right? All in a different order. There's no criteria per se. Like I said, there were notes. So Hammam read half of it, and then Ma'mar said that he ran out of breath. So I turned the book around and read to him. I read it to him, complete book, like this. So this is a important one. Again, if you want like an example of a Sahifa, what did a Sahifa look like? This is the earliest form of hadith writing, the earliest genre is a Sahifa writing. If you want to see it, this is a good example, good sample of what a Sahifa would look like, right? And then Ibn Umar, these are some of the individuals who wrote from him. Yeah. So this Nafi' is whom Imam Malik narrates from. If you look at in the Muwatta, the most famous isnad is Malik, Nafi', Ibn Umar. This one over here. Then we have Anas bin Malik. So Thumama, remember we said Thumama wrote from. There's a number of these, we'll skip this. And Aisha anha. Aisha has Ziyad ibn Abi Sufyan and Urwa ibn Zubayr and Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. So Muawiyah, this is a companion, we know this, and Ziyad as well. And Urwa is nephew to Aisha anha, right? And Ibn Abbas, a number of individuals who've written from him, but I think we can. And Jabir, did I put Jabir's name here? I don't know why I didn't put his name. Jabir, it comes after Ibn Abbas. Jabir is important, very important companion. He was a junior Ansarite. He's an Ansari. He was a mufti amongst them. So Jabir always comes in the hadith books. He's a Ansari mufti from the Ansar. Jabir ibn Abdullah is his name. So he would be is it the sixth? Yeah, he'd be the sixth one who would come after him. So individuals who wrote from Jabir, then these are some very important individuals, by the way. We're just skipping through their names. Right. This, I think, we will look at next lesson. Yeah. So if you look here, this is very quickly Sahifa, Musannaf, Mu'jam, and then this is what we all know of. The Sahih Bukhari, the 6 books pretty much come from this generation, right? So we'll look at this next lesson, inshallah. All right. Do you have any questions? If you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. Ilan? Okay. All right. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.